Hi, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the day. Thank you for hanging in there with us for this wonderful Elder Justice Conference. I know I have learned so much from all of our speakers, and I really appreciate everyone being here. This conference would not have happened without the support of our wonderful design team, who you will hear from later. But first, we have our closing keynote speaker, Hilary Dalin. Hilary is the Director of the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services at the Administration for Community Living in Washington, D.C. The office coordinates and manages a federal strategy for elder justice to provide coordinated and seamless responses to transform adult victims of abuse into survivors and to prevent abuse before it happens. The office supports elder rights and legal assistance programs for older Americans funded in every state and also supports pension counseling and assistance programs. The office also works closely with ACL's Office of Long-Term Ombudsman Programs. So welcome, Hilary, and thank you for closing out our conference.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody. I bring greetings from your colleagues and partners at ACL, and also from the billions of DC area cicadas that are making a racket outside. So if you hear something that sounds like a car alarm, rest assured, it is only our 17-year cicadas bursting out. Definitely want to thank everybody who was involved in making this conference possible. I'm not going to name them all by name. I do hope they get named by name before the end of this session, but I don't want to take the time to do that now. But what an amazing conference. Hasn't this been just absolutely awesome? Yeah, everything from the content, the presenters, and frankly, all of you, all the participants in the interactions, everything has really confirmed what we share, which is an emphasis and a deep, abiding commitment to advancing equity and racial justice, meaningful inclusion and opportunity in all that we do, including ensuring that older people in underrepresented and underserved communities are at the table, and that their interests are at the forefront of everything we do in all of our elder rights advocacy. Those principles have been foundational for us at ACL and before ACL and the Administration on Aging since the outset, really. In the Older Americans Act, I would point you to what we lawyers call precatory language of Section 101 of the Older Americans Act, which presents exactly those precepts using 1965 language, not 2021 language, but it's all right there in the Older Americans Act, which funds so much of what we and you do, and is also reflected in the Elder Justice Act. And we just heard so much over the last 3 days about work that is supported by and really promoted by the Elder Justice Act as well. So we've heard so much over the last 3 days about the most critical threats to elders with economic or social need, and especially to elders in communities of color and other underrepresented communities, with very practical solutions, things you can actually do, things you can wrap your brain around and your hands around and actually take on and do things, and some key themes. So now, because of this conference, you are all, and I feel the same for myself, more empowered to affect real change at the individual level and systemically as well, to implement policy and programmatic advances that will improve the life of all of Florida's elders. So I'm going to effuse just a little longer because I'm just really so impressed by what you all have achieved over the last 3 days. And by the way, I'm a Northerner, so forgive me for saying y'all. I don't pronounce it right. You have to forgive me. The substantive sessions were so content laden and action focused. We heard about how to identify and understand the issues in nursing home evictions and how to go about representing the individuals subject to those evictions and how to look at the systemic problems behind those evictions. We heard about abuse and neglect and your state's remedies, which are actually quite interesting, and I always enjoy hearing more about them and how to use those remedies to combat financial exploitation and other forms of abuse of older Floridians. We heard about home and community-based services under Medicaid in a very pragmatic way, how to understand that program, how to deal with the issues, and how to get people the real honest to goodness benefits of that program. And that is certainly something that we at ACL are very, very interested in, and more. And then there were the overarching themes that were just so cogently addressed: racial equity, cultural competency and humility, with a trauma-informed frame around it all, equal access across the current digital divide. And I'm going to put in a plug here for the legal risk detector tool, which we think is a wonderful way of linking together the aging network, including the elder rights aspects of the aging network, and weaving that all together for Florida's older people. And I'll also say, as a side note, that that tool was developed in partnership with an office that I ran for many years, but I have no claim on that tool. I'm not a techie. I did not have anything to do with it. It was my successor who helped develop that tool with Pro Bono Net and the University of Pennsylvania. And what an incredible opportunity for Florida. And we at ACL are really looking forward to hearing more about how you use that tool. So there are incredibly ambitious goals that were implicit and explicit in the delivery of this conference. And I just want to talk about a few ways to go that you might think about in going about achieving those goals. One way is through Florida's Legal Assistance Enhancement Program grant. Everybody here is a part of that grant, either a principal in that grant or a stakeholder or a partner or all three. And we're very proud to be a sponsor of this conference through that grant. Way back when Legal Services of North Florida and Legal Services of Greater Miami came together to propose a LEAP grant that would focus on disaster relief, COVID didn't exist, right? And the thought was that the disaster relief would be modeled after hurricanes, which you know a thing or two about in Florida. And not that they've gone away, but oh my goodness, do we have current multiple crises all over, surrounding us, enveloping us, that call for a uniform, rights-focused approach. And that's what we've seen and heard at this conference, and also through that grant, through the entire lifetime of that grant. Another way to amplify the learnings from this conference and just move forward on those goals are resources, both national and Florida-based. And certainly everybody I'm sharing this virtual podium with is a part of that. I wanted to highlight the National Center for Law and Elder Rights. I know that you all are making ample use of NCLR and the resources that NCLR offers, and Justice in Aging, which is NCLR's host organization as well. And I certainly encourage you to continue to use those resources and their impressive expertise. We heard at this conference from the Florida Health Justice Project about the work that they're doing on access to home and community-based services. You've got your Department of Elder Affairs, which is quite the advocate for you. And again, that legal risk detector tool is brought to you by DOEA and specifically Sarah Halsell, so kudos there. And then all of you together, legal assistants, the Elder Rights Bar, the Elder Law Bar, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, Adult Protective Services, your area agencies on aging, state and federal prosecutorial authorities, protection and advocacy, and so much more. You can achieve so much and really model and share for the rest of the country. So tonight, I hope you'll all take a little bit of a victory lap, especially the design team. You should take more than a victory lap. I hope you also get to do some post-office hours libations together. Relax, because the real work of this conference starts tomorrow morning, when I hope that each one of you will ask yourself, what will you do? What am I going to do Thursday morning and the morning after that and next week and so on, as a consequence of participating in this conference? And I assure you that we at ACL can't wait to hear what you'll do as you go from strength to strength. So thank you very much. Congratulations. And now I think we're going to turn to what I hope will be a really fun session. Rapid fire is usually really fun. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Hilary, for that call to action at the end of this action-packed conference. And thank you for the work you're doing on the national level to support advocates in Florida. We are going to turn it over to a rapid fire panel. We thought that'd be a fun way to end the day. And let's see, I think we have Ellen Cheek up first. And Ellen is a staff attorney with the Senior Legal Helpline at Bay Area Legal Services.
Well, I do hope we have fun. And I just want to start out by saying what a privilege it was to be on this design team. After the year or so we've had, it was really a good reminder of the dedicated and talented advocates we have here in the state. And it was wonderful to be part of this group. I want to talk today about a project that my colleagues and I at Bay Area Legal Services have been working on. In collaboration with professionals throughout the aging services and enforcement networks, we created a web-based app called the APS Crime Reporter. Our goal? To use technology to get the civil side and the criminal side on the same page in elder abuse cases. Let me tell you how we got started and why. We focused on the enforcement gap. To understand the issue, consider the following. First, abuse, neglect, and exploitation of a vulnerable adult is a crime in Florida. Also, Florida requires adult protective services to notify law enforcement in cases of suspected criminal behavior. In fact, APS fields and investigates tens of thousands of complaints of abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation every year, and notifies law enforcement in thousands of those cases. However, though it's difficult to document due to data issues, it does appear that criminal investigation, arrest, and prosecution of those who abuse, neglect, and financially exploit vulnerable adults occurs in only a fraction of the cases that are referred. Thank you. Why the disconnect? Well, there are many reasons, all of them important. You've heard about several during this conference, starting with the profound underreporting of these violations by their victims. And these are difficult cases to prosecute by any measure, certainly. But talking to civil attorneys and prosecutors, APS and law enforcement, one thing became clear. The required communication between API or Adult Protective Services and law enforcement is often not productive. Notifications are being sent, but not necessarily being received. Next, please. Why not? Well, because adult protective investigators and law enforcement have very different jobs, and they use a very different vocabulary. For example, not substantiated and verified are very important words for an adult protective investigator, but not so much for a law enforcement officer. Conversely, preponderance of the evidence and probable cause are terms which concern detectives and prosecutors, but which are not the province of APS. Could tech help? We thought so. Working with APS, law enforcement, state attorneys, and software developer Pro Bono Net, and with a grant from the Department of Justice Office of Victims of Crime, we created a web-based app called the Crime Reporter. Think of the app like a translation tool, which automatically lets a field representative trained in protective investigation submit a report which is relevant to an officer trained in criminal investigation. This is how it works. The app provides the protective investigator with a guided interview, which was created with law enforcement in mind, so that the final report generated by the app contains the fundamental information that law enforcement needs in terms which are relevant to the criminal charges. What's next? Next slide, please. What's next? As we speak, the APS Crime Reporter is in the final stages of development. The hope is that it, or something very like it, will be integrated into the Florida Adult Protective Services system to increase identification of cases referred by APS, which merit further criminal investigation, to increase the likelihood of eventual criminal prosecution in worthy cases, to provide an accountable and consistent database of referrals from APS to law enforcement, and to reduce interagency frustration with alleged inaction and lack of responsiveness. Next, please. So think about your practice and the way you communicate, or don't, with the critical members of your network. Maybe an app like the APS Crime Reporter could help. I'd be happy to discuss that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Next, we've got a member of our design team, Tequisha Myles. Tequisha is the supervising attorney at Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach County. So what's on your mind this afternoon, Tequisha?
What's always on my mind is housing. So we're going to talk for the few minutes that I have with you about fair housing rights for seniors. And although the Fair Housing Act has been around since 1968, it's always ever changing and evolving. And we had one such new change that went into effect in February of this year. And HUD and the Biden administration have now seen it fit to protect the rights of more people. And so now, instead of just the 7 protected classes that we normally see, race, sex, color, religion, disability, familial status, now we have the HUD is accepting and will investigate cases involving sexual orientation and gender identity expression. So for 53 years, they did not see that sex discrimination could also encompass gender identity expression and sexual orientation. But now, in light of a United States Supreme Court case of Bostick versus Clayton County, which the Supreme Court decided in June of 2020. And in that case, the Supreme Court said that it is illegal to discriminate against people based on the sexual orientation or gender identity expression in a workplace setting. So 6, 7, 8 months later, HUD took that ruling and started to apply it in fair housing. And so now HUD has said that same discrimination that the United States Supreme Court said is illegal in the employment setting is also illegal in the housing market. So now in Florida and all across the country, if you have seniors who are LGBTQ and are facing housing discrimination in any of the housing providing situations, where it could be an apartment complex, a housing provider such as the assisted living facility or independent living facility, condo, HOA, or even municipality and their zoning laws, you can now file a complaint with HUD or with your local organization, and they will actually investigate those claims. So that is our first thing we want to highlight. The second area are 55 and older communities. In South Florida, that's everywhere. We have Kings Point, Century Village, you name it. On every block, there is a 55 and older community. I can't imagine if you drive through the villages that you don't see 55 and older communities. That if you're in Tampa, you're going through Sun City. Everywhere in Florida is a 55 and older community. And so we're going to talk about that little exception to the Fair Housing Act. And essentially, HUD carved out this exception. So it's an exemption for housing for older persons. So essentially, that's why we say you can either be a property of 62 and older, or most likely what you see is properties that are 55 and older. And although they say 55 and older, they still have to abide by most of the Fair Housing Act. What they can do is discriminate against families with children. So they can make rules that say, we don't want children under the age of 18 on our premises, okay? And so, but I bring this up because this is not a blanket exemption that they can use. They have to do certain things to keep this exemption. And so they have to essentially ensure that they abide by the 80-20 rule. And at least 80% of the occupied units must have someone who is 55 and older. And you might think, well, how will we know who's living in the unit? Every 2 years, the association must conduct an age verification survey. Plus, they must also register with the Florida Commission on Human Relations to be able to keep this exemption and the ability to discriminate against children, families with children. Now, some of the most common issues that we see out of 55 and older communities is that we sometimes have grandparents who are forced to take on the responsibility of raising grandchildren. And so that has been probably one of the hardest things we have to kind of explain and deal with, is that, you know, when maybe a grandparent, a senior's child has passed away or gets incarcerated, and to avoid the grandchildren going into foster care or some other kind of relative placement, the grandparent steps up to take and raise the child. But the wonderful HOA says, no, you can't have this child here. And so that's when we kind of have to, you know, look at the living situation, look at how the association, if they're doing their age surveys and if they're doing their registration with the Florida Commission on Human Relations, whether they can actually say the child can't live there. And then this leads me to my final topic, which is disability discrimination. And disability discrimination is probably the biggest thing that we see in our office, biggest thing that most fair housing providers, fair housing agencies see across the state. And it's the #1 area that HUD receives complaints on. And so although in 1968, when the Fair Housing Act was enacted, it was rampant race discrimination. Now what we see is rampant discrimination against disability. And everyone sitting in this audience at your computer, you could at one point in your life, sadly, become disabled. So it's one of the only protected classes that essentially comes across and can affect anybody. And so essentially disability could be any kind of physical or mental impairment that substantially impacts one or more of your life activities, okay? And so we, you know, a lot of times we think of just the person who has a physical disability, but it really, one of the areas that we see the most is people who are impacted by a mental disability and who are being treated unfairly by the housing provider. So it doesn't protect the person who's a direct threat, who's maybe will cause harm because they're off their meds, or, you know, harm to the apartment complex or harm to the condo association. You know, those people are unfortunately not protected by the Fair Housing Act. But the person who has depression, schizophrenia, maybe they have autism or some other kind of limitation caused by a mental illness will be protected. And in order to protect their rights, we do one of two things. We either will ask for a reasonable accommodation of their disability. So accommodation is a change to a rule or a policy or procedure, or we're going to ask for a modification. Maybe there's some physical change to the property that we need to have done. Maybe if they have a physical impairment, we need grab bars in the bathroom, or they are in a wheelchair, they need a ramp built. Or, you know, they may need to have some sort of other kind of something put in place so they can really enjoy the property like any other resident. So there's no magic words. I can't say, you know, you say this, this, and this, and poof, you'll have your reasonable accommodation or modification. It can sometimes be a little fight. What we call it an interactive process. It's a, you know, It's a give and take. You know, we put this offer on the table, the landlord or housing provider puts another offer on the table, and we have to try to come and work out some sort of agreement. So, you know, the reasonable accommodation modification for the most times should be approved, but it cannot cause an undue or impose an undue financial or administrative burden or alter the housing provider's business, okay? And so the thing that we see the most are emotional support animals and service animals. And for the most part, service animals, I think if you walk into the office and you have somebody that's a physical disability that they can see, most people don't question the service animal. But where we have a lot of fights are with the emotional support animals. And so, you know, with that, it should be something that's an easy process. I submit a doctor's note or a note for my therapist or my home health care or my social worker, someone who has knowledge of my disability, and the association or the apartment complex reviews it and makes a determination. But sometimes we get into those fights where they say they have a no pet policy. Well, the no pet policy does not apply under the Fair Housing Act because my emotional support animal is not a pet. Say it to yourself. My emotional support animal is not a pet. So therefore, if you say I cannot have a pet, doesn't apply to me because I don't have a pet. I have an emotional support animal. So it can be technically almost any animal, but we have to once again look at if it's going to impose a undue burden or fundamental alteration to the housing provider's business. What makes it kind of hard with every kind of thing that we do is that we have unscrupulous people who set up these internet websites and say for $75, I can give you a certification or a vest for your dog that says that your dog's an emotional support animal. We don't encourage people to do that. That's bad, mostly fraud, and it's going to take someone's money. So we want people to go to a licensed doctor, therapist, social worker, and get their note. So the note says that this person has a disability, impacts their activities of daily living, and it is necessary for them to enjoy the property. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Tequisha. I love all those tidbits, and now I want to know more. So we'll have to discuss later. Next up, we have Sarah Halsell, who has, of course, been an integral part of planning this conference. So thank you for all your support during this process, Sarah. Sarah is the State Legal Services Developer at the Florida Department of Elder Affairs. Take it away, Sarah.
Okay, hey. Hi everyone, Sarah Halsell here, and I have 5 minutes to talk to you about just our overall goal, I think, as advocates who are either in the aging network or working in legal aid, is essentially to make sure that we're improving access to justice. And we're here at this conference talking about access to justice for seniors, and not just seniors, but those who really are the most vulnerable. So I think the conference like this is, a way that we can improve access to justice because we're all building capacity to make sure that we are equipped to serve those who come to our doors. But I want to talk to you in the next few minutes about outreach. And I think outreach is a really critical way that we are needing to think about improving access to justice. And what I mean by outreach is reaching those who need our services the most, not requiring everyone to find their way to our office, not requiring everybody to go through a certain door to access services, but identifying people in the community who really are the most vulnerable, who need our services the most, and who might not even know they have a legal problem. So I want to talk specifically about 3 populations that I want to challenge all of us to be examining our programs and our services, and particularly our access models to those programs and services, to make sure that we're thinking of the needs of these 3 groups and building capacity within our programs to serve the needs. But more importantly is finding the folks who need these services. And that is long-term care residents, victims of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and those who are at risk of plenary guardianships. And so we've addressed all of that at this conference. I think we're all going to be better equipped after these last 3 days. And as Hilary said, to hit the ground running starting tomorrow, to really to be able to provide services in those 3 areas of law. But I want to talk about where these people are in the community and how do we reach them. So Hilary already set me up talking about the elder law risk detector. So I've talked about that briefly at the session on the digital divide. That discussion was really interesting. So if you weren't able to be at that discussion, I hope that you'll be able to go back in a couple weeks when the video is posted and listen to that. That is really talking about how we want to make sure that we consider technology and not use technology as creating more barriers to services. And of course, there's so much focus on technology, and there should be. I mean, it's a tool for us to use. But when it comes to the senior population, we want to consider not only access in the way of, just having the internet, but also fluency and comfort level with the tool itself. And so I'm going to just share my screen briefly, and I'm going to show you a new website that we have through the Florida Department of Elder Affairs. And that is the Florida Elder Law Risk Detector. So our new site is floridaelderlaw.org. It will automatically link you to law.elderaffairs.org. So either way, you will get to this site that you can see here. And what we're trying to accomplish on this site are just a few things. We want it to be an online home for the Florida Senior Legal Helpline, which I'm sure all of you know about by now. It's been around since 2005, but it's never had an online home. And so here at floridaelderlaw.org, you can find information about that service. It does have some legal information, but it is the online home for our new Florida Elder Law Risk Detector. So if you click here, it will take you to a toolkit. And this is particularly important for outreach because we need you to not only know that the tool exists, but how to use it and what it's for. So the toolkit, which is all online as of just like the last week or two, here where it says view risk detector, you'll actually access the tool itself. There's recorded training that's about 45 minutes where I go over the risk detector, kind of walk you through it. Obviously, I don't have time for that now in this rapid fire, but it's right there for you to look at on your own time. There is a handbook. There's an FAQ about different data privacy issues that come up with using online tools, training slides for you to use and adapt. So it's all here. And just in sum, what the risk detector does is it capitalizes on the need to really think about what having a no wrong door perspective means. Wherever a senior goes for help, we want them to be able to get the services that they need. And for those of you who are in the aging network, a lot of times, and what I should say is we're all part of the aging network. If you serve seniors, whether you're in law enforcement or whether you're in legal aid or whether you're in a traditional aging services program, we're all part of the aging network. And so no matter where a senior goes for help, we want to make sure that they get the help they need. So the way that the risk detector can help, and I'll just give a very concrete example, and this really pertains to the resident of long-term care population that I want to focus on. We had a social worker in a nursing home in the Gainesville area identify that a patient had signed some papers, a power of attorney particularly, and that the power of attorney was being used to financial exploitation. Essentially, the family member had taken the power of attorney, which wasn't even valid, to the bank. The bank accepted it, and they changed the beneficiary on the account. So the social worker had seen all of this and used the risk detector, which is a guided interview. We're able to identify the facts of the situation and make a referral to Three Rivers Legal Services. And Three Rivers was able to get into that situation and fix it and revoke that document and do a new power of attorney to make sure that the account beneficiary designation was changed back to the way that the senior had intended for it to be. So I want to just say with the risk detector, right now it is a general risk detector for 5 areas of law that seniors typically encounter. But I'd love to announce, because it's just brand new and it's something that I think is really relevant to residents of long-term care, that we're going to be creating a specific pathway in Florida through the risk detector for advocates working with long-term care residents to be able to make referrals for those residents to legal aid. And, we want to be working with you guys in legal aid to make sure that you have the capacity to serve the needs of long-term care residents. One reason, and then I'll be done, that is so relevant is that we are all being, we live in a data-driven society, and we haven't talked a lot about this at this conference, but I know if you have met me in the past, we've talked a lot about data, and we're embarking on a revised data collection system to meet new national requirements coming down from the Administration for Community Living. And one way that that's very relevant to our discussion today is that for the first time, we will be collecting data on how many residents of long-term care are accessing services at legal aid that are becoming clients, and where casework is being done and closed on issues that are relevant to residents of long-term care. We want to make sure that that number for you is not zero. We want to make sure not only are you equipped to serve residents of long-term care, but that you have a way to reach them. And we think the elder law risk detector is a great way to do that. So I'll be in touch more as we go into the work that we all have to be doing this year to accomplish these outreach goals. But in the meantime, reach out to me if you have any ideas or thoughts about this. Thanks so much.
Sarah, you want to stop your share?
Oh, sure.
And next, we're going to hear from Jocelyn Armand, who is the Advocacy Director at Legal Services of Greater Miami.
Thanks, Kathy, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us. I am going to talk a little bit, because I have 5 minutes to talk. I'm going to talk about SNAP, particularly how we can maximize seniors' SNAP allotment by using the excess allowable medical expense deduction. So before I talk about the deduction, I want to briefly encourage each and every one of you to screen your senior clients for potential SNAP problems. And I bring this up because in our practice, it's often that we see a senior come in for an issue that they've identified, such as a housing issue or a Social Security issue. Sometimes it's a consumer issue, whatever the case may be. And when we start doing our intake and we start screening for other potential problems, we identify and notice that SNAP tends to be something that's wrong, right? Whether it's that they're not receiving the benefit and they're eligible for it, or maybe the allotment is wrong, or maybe they're not reporting expenses that could potentially help increase their allotment. And so I want to encourage all of you to screen your clients for potential SNAP problems, because usually our seniors don't identify that as a potential problem. And as we all know, food insecurity among seniors is becoming an increasingly bigger and bigger problem, especially with the pandemic, where a lot of our seniors were not able to visit community centers where maybe they were fed a meal or leave their homes as much to access food. So I would be more than happy to share with you all the tools that we use to try to screen for potential problems and our food stamp budgets and what we use to help identify those issues. And I am going to also put in a plug now for the legal risk detector tool, because that's a great way to identify potential problems with food insecurity and seniors and SNAP. So if you haven't used it, if you haven't tried it, if you haven't played around with it, I encourage you all to visit the website and give it a whirl. It really is an amazing tool. So what I really wanted to briefly jump into and talk with you all is like I mentioned, the excess medical expense deduction. Try to say that 3 times in a row, but it is a deduction that applies to seniors, and for purposes of SNAP, senior is 60 years of age and older. So unlike SSI or Social Security, where it's 65, for SNAP it's 60. This also applies to disabled individuals, but we're just going to focus on seniors in age right now for the purposes of this little rapid fire session. So these allowable medical expenses, you can all find them in the Department of Children and Families program manual. I will make sure that we link that to the material so it's easily accessible to you all. Some of them are really obvious and some of them are not so obvious. And some are I think that many people may not know about them. So I wanted to run them with you all. The rule really is that the expense has to be more than $35 and it has to be an unreimbursed out-of-pocket expense. So this has to be something that is not going to be covered by an insurance, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, or private insurance, if that's something that the senior has. And it's not going to be paid for the senior by someone else, maybe like a family member, a relative, friend, whatever the case may be. Some are very obvious. So for example, just the cost of seeing a doctor, medical or dental care, psychotherapy, rehab. So that's like your typical office visit costs, maybe a copay, something along those lines. Those are obviously, they're very obvious and they could be deducted. Same thing with hospitalization or outpatient treatment or rehab care. So anything that comes up as an expense for the senior that is not going to be covered maybe by a long-term care plan or an insurance plan could be considered a deductible expense. Prescription drugs, co-pays, if the senior has one, again, seems to be like an obvious one, but any cost related to refilling a prescription or obtaining a prescription med is an allowable medical expense. What may not be as obvious is that in certain circumstances, over-the-counter medication and medical supplies or medical equipment, when it's prescribed, could also be counted. Those costs could be counted as a medical expense. Expenses related to dentures, hearing aids, and prosthetics can be are allowable medical expenses. Same with eyeglasses or contact lenses if they are prescribed. So again, allowable medical expenses. Any sort of health insurance policy that maybe the senior pays for, including Medicare premiums. If you have a senior that may not be eligible for QMB or is not eligible for coverage of their Medicare premiums, also allowable medical expenses. This one is not that obvious, and we just briefly touched upon it, but the cost of securing and maintaining a service animal, including pet food, vet bills, and pet insurance. And so we see more and more seniors that have service animals and are using service animals. And so that is one that is not as obvious, but it is an allowable medical expense. Another one that's not as obvious and is also an allowable medical expense is transportation costs to get to and from a doctor and even to obtain or get their medications. So if you have a senior that maybe is using special transportation services or even maybe possibly public transportation, as long as it's a reasonable cost, that could also be considered an allowable medical expense for the purposes of the deduction. And another one that's definitely not as obvious, and when I initially started doing SNAP work, I feel like I had to read this one 2 or 3 times, is the cost of maintaining a homemaker, a housekeeper, a home health aide, obviously that's not covered by any sort of an insurance program, and even childcare. So this is going to be relevant to our seniors that maybe have grandchildren or children in their care and maybe have to pay for a nanny or somebody to help take care of the kids. Now, it has to be necessary due to the senior's age and illness. So it's not, we have to obviously show that it's necessary, but that is an allowable medical expense that can be deducted from gross income as a under this excess reduction. And then lastly, companion phone service. That's different than just your phone line. It's a special type of phone service, but that cost is also an allowable expense. So I encourage you all to screen your seniors for potential SNAP problems, and of course, review the list of allowable medical expenses. 1 out of 5 seniors use the exception or these expenses correctly. So it's really underutilized. If you have any questions about SNAP or about expenses or other deductions, feel free to contact me. My information will be on the page. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Okay, next, Leslie Powell-Boudreaux is the Executive Director at Legal Services of North Florida.
Thank you, Kathy. And I'm going to talk about something a little less substantive than my colleagues, because it's something that over time I've learned is so critical to the work that we do. And it's the simple fact that legal solutions don't work on their own, and other solutions may not work without legal solutions, and that community partnerships are so key and so critical to really looking at the elders' situation and making resolutions that have long-term lasting effects. And, Jocelyn just gave me a really great example for a segue, which is, SNAP benefits are something that so many seniors have. They don't necessarily get the amount that they're eligible for. And so the question is, how do you know what to look for, whether you're a social worker or you're an attorney or a paralegal or other legal professional or someone else who's serving a senior? What does that process look like? And how can we, in all those collective professions and all those collective service roles, do that work? So community partnerships, has been suggested by Sarah, and talking about the Elder Risk Detector tool, make sure that we're all making sure that happens. And how can we make sure we're all working together? Ellen started us talking about how we're speaking different languages. And I think probably a lot of that has been heard as the presentations have happened throughout the conference, that perhaps we don't say things in the same way, depending on which perspective we have, and depending on how we're hearing it from the elder even. And so how can we make sure that we're speaking those languages in a way that we can translate to and for one another? And the only way to do that is to build those community partnerships. So if you are not already, as a legal aid provider, working with your community partners, and not just the elder service providers directly, but maybe your local food pantries and food banks and others who serve elders in your community who may not be connected to the elder service delivery system, and churches and others, again, who may not be fully connected, to make sure that those partnerships continue and are strengthened. And as we've learned very clearly in our disaster recovery work over decades, really, changes in the law, changes in staff, changes in theories and philosophies and terminology about what we call things become really critical over time. And how do we make sure that those relationships stay in spite of all those changes? And it does take work. It's like a marriage. It takes work. It's like any long-term relationship. It takes work. It takes commitment. And so I'm here as a little bit of a cheerleader to talk about the importance of those relationships, and how, and just to ask you, as you hear these next couple rapid fire sessions, and as you look back at the conference as a whole, to think about what your partnerships are, whatever your perspective is coming to this conference, what other partnerships you might need, who do you not know that you should know, who doesn't know you that should know you, and to think about how you build those relationships over time. And like the substantive work, it's a practice. And we hope that you will engage in that practice as we continue to improve the systems that we have to serve the elders in our communities. So thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Christie.
Thank you so much, Leslie. You have a great team here at LSNF, and it's been an absolute joy to work with them on this conference. So I appreciate you inviting me to help with this conference. And next up, we have Lizzie Johnson, and I have written down here attorney. Now, that is just not enough for Lizzie. She is a true powerhouse with a real heart for helping older adults. So I feel like I need to make a fancier title for you, Lizzie, but take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to talk to you briefly about grandparents. Prior to the COVID-19 global pandemic, grandparents raising their grandchildren was a national discussion. In fact, it was a national debate on how to address this issue, because they are raising their grandchildren at an alarming rate. Households led by an aging senior continues to increase every year due to abuse, neglect, substance abuse, drug abuse, mental illness, or even incarceration of the parents or the legal guardians. In 2010, about 1 in 14 U.S. children were being raised by grandchildren. By 2017, it became 1 in 8 children was being raised by by grandparents. In the United States in 2020, over 2.3 million children are being raised by their grandparents. In Florida, there's an estimated 139,542 grandparents currently raising their grandchildren. The Census Bureau broke down Florida family households that's being ran by grandparents, and they report that 49.6% are Caucasian. 28% of head of households are by African Americans, 20% Hispanics, 2% are Asian. Typically, the grandparent is going to be 65.5% of the time is going to be a female. 38.2% are unmarried. 24.4% of the grandparents raising their grandchildren have a disability. 18.8% live at or below the federal poverty level. And they believe that for every one child in foster care, 19 other children are being raised by a relative, including grandparents. The Journal of Pediatrics did an examination of the National Survey of Children's Health, which is a recurring federal study that's done periodically throughout the year. So during this examination, they found that children living with their grandparents are 4 times more likely to come from a family of divorce or separation. These children are more likely to have had their legal guardian or their parents incarcerated, which led to them being housed now with their grandparents. They're 6 times more likely than a child who's not living with a grandparent to have experienced at least 3 different traumatic experiences. They're 4 times more likely to have lived with a parent with a substance abuse or drug addiction. They're 4 times more likely to have observed physical violence between their parents or adults in the home prior to them being placed with their grandparents. Some of the children have their own disabilities or behavioral issues of their own. If it's a preschool age child, age 3 to 5, they're 5 times more likely to have ADHD. If they're school age, the age of 6 to 17, they're 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD at some point. Despite caring for children with greater developmental disabilities or poor temperaments, grandparent caregivers seems to cope with parenting just as well as regular parents. There are prominent people in our communities. Some of them may be even our colleagues, our families. We know national figures like former presidents and athletes who have been raised by their grandparents. However, this seems to be even worse because the country has not come up with a way to control this issue. We have aging seniors who are taking care of children. There's an article out there that estimates that 39% of these grandparents who are raising these grandchildren will not live to see that child become an adult at the age of 18. Many of these grandparents need help navigating the barriers to raising these children. Many of these grandparents are not licensed foster care providers, so therefore they don't get a lot of those benefits if those children was placed with them by DCF. They do not have the legal authority to care for these children, and they may face barriers enrolling them in school. Increasingly, I get calls because these grandparents are having issues getting medical treatment for the children because doctors or medical providers want some kind of court order or legal authority saying that they can make these health decisions for the minor children. Many of them do not receive any kind of child support, or they may be unaware that they can access public benefits for these children. So a lot of these grandparents, they need legal help. And they also need non-legal help. They need basically help to raise this child. As many of us know that raising one child takes a village. So we're all part of that village. Whether we can help direct this grandparent to maybe to shine, to help them register for public benefits such as Social Security Disability, food stamps, or any other, even Medicaid, or even CHIP, which is the healthy kids, that at least that's what it used to be called back in the day, the healthy kids, so that the kids can get health treatment. A lot of the grandparents don't know that there's a lot of access out there for them. They may not know that there's home energy assistance to help them pay the utility bills. They may be unaware that there's benefits to help them pay for their telephone or your cellular service, or they may have LIHEAP that they can qualify for. So in closing, there's a lot of state, county, and local governments that have programs and initiatives to help grandparents raising minor children in all of our areas. Some of them are even providing childcare assistance for these grandparents. To determine or to enforce their legal rights regarding grandchildren benefits, housing-related matters such as seeking a fair housing accommodation, or even getting a housing subsidy through Section 8, or getting on a wait list with public housing. They may need support services in their local community. We just need you to help us spread the word that grandparents have rights, and all they need to do is just call their local legal aid or any other attorney in their area who may help them get the tools that they need to care for these children, because this is an increasing problem. The global pandemic did not stop this issue. The opioid crisis blew up this issue a couple of years ago, and it was the national discussion. And just because COVID has come, this problem didn't go away. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Okay, next up is Ann Swerlick. Ann is a senior policy analyst at the Florida Policy Institute. So what's on your mind today, Ann?
Well, I'd like to talk about Medicaid expansion, which I know people have been hearing a lot about in Florida for a number of years, but want to emphasize how this really is an issue that affects older Floridians. Medicaid, as you know, many of you know, our current Medicaid program excludes lots of uninsured people and excludes lots of older Floridians. And we're not talking about older Floridians, those that are 55 to 64. These are people, that age group, with much more likely than younger people to have serious chronic health conditions. Up to 84% of people aged 55 to 64 have at least one pre-existing condition, which prior to the ACA would have led to them being denied private insurance coverage as well. Now, Florida is one of just 12 states where if you're an uninsured adult with income below poverty level, that's about $1,000 per month for a single person, you're going to be caught in the coverage gap. And that means you can't qualify for Medicaid because you're not poor enough, and because we have all these crazy different categories of coverage that you have to fit yourself into. But you can't go on the marketplace that was set up by the Affordable Care Act and get help purchasing insurance. It's projected in Florida that we are excluding about 184,000 low-income uninsured Floridians ages 50 to 64 that could gain coverage with expansion. And states that have expanded, some have experienced since 2014, and then more and more that have been coming on board. And so there are literally now hundreds of studies, scientific research that documents the overwhelming positive impacts for people in expansion states versus non-expansion states. We're seeing, not surprisingly, significant reductions in the uninsured, greater financial security for people, less debt, less evictions, and of course, better health outcomes. But studies have shown that Medicaid expansion is associated with improved access to screening and treatment for health conditions that are more prevalent in older adults, like cancer screenings, early stage cancer diagnosis, diabetes, heart disease, and depression. Medicaid expansion, the research is showing, and there's a growing body of research showing that it is significantly narrowing disparities in health coverage and health outcomes for people of color. For example, there was a study in 2018 published in the Journal of American Medicine that found reductions in mortality from end-stage renal disease expansion compared to non-expansion states, that there were particularly large improvements for Black people who are at higher risk for kidney failure. I think finally, I can't emphasize enough that the research is showing Medicaid expansion prevents thousands of deaths each year. There was a study done by the National Bureau of Economic Research that showed Medicaid expansion saved lives of at least 19,200 adults ages 55 to 64 over the 4-year period of 2014 through 2017. This was across all the expansion states. But on the flip side, 15,600 older adults died prematurely over that same period because their states did not expand Medicaid. And that in Florida, that number was 2,776. So I'm going to stop there. I know we're right at closing time. If you want more information, there's a lot of resources, a lot of information on how to get involved in this issue. You can check our website out, Florida Policy Institute, Florida Voices for Health, Florida Health Justice Project. We're all working in collaboration on this really important issue for older Floridians. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, and thanks to the whole design team for coming together and putting together this wonderful conference agenda. And also thanks so much to everyone who signed up, registered, and came to the sessions during the last 3 days. As you can tell from this session right here, there's still a lot to learn and so many things that we weren't able to include in this agenda. But we hope to have this conference in person or maybe hybrid every year so that it really does become an annual conference. And I have a couple of announcements and then we'll close out. And I believe this might be, isn't this funny, the first session that we've gone over time on. I had the design team. We are going to send out to you all a link to a final conference survey, and you'll get that probably tomorrow morning. So we really would encourage you to do that survey. Also, for every session that you attended, there was a survey in the session's description that you could link on so that you could evaluate that individual survey. So we would really encourage you and appreciate you doing that. As Christie said at the beginning, every session was recorded. And if you didn't get to see it because we had concurrent sessions, you will be able to see it. We're quickly editing those and getting them up on our YouTube channels under a Equal Justice Conference playlist. We'll have a link for one of those tomorrow. There won't be any of the videos in it, just the pre-roll video that you've been seeing for the last 3 days, but they'll all get there in June, hopefully the first couple of weeks in June. That's our desire. Also, the sessions had files. So if you didn't notice that, some of the PowerPoints are already in there. A couple of them we received today and we'll put in there this afternoon. Well, probably tomorrow morning. So go back to the feed loop site, look at the sessions, get the links for the surveys, and get those files if you haven't had access to them yet. Everybody's emails is there in the speaker bios. If you need information about anyone, you can always contact myself, Kathy Grunewald at Legal Services in North Florida, or Christie Bhageloe at Florida Legal Services, or email us both together. So one or the other of us will answer your email as quickly as possible. But that closes out the 2021 virtual Florida Elder Justice Conference. Also, thanks to all of our supporters, the Florida Department of Elder Affairs, the Administration for Community Living, Legal Services of Greater Miami, Florida Legal Services, and Legal Services of North Florida. Thank you all. Thank you, design team. Have a lovely evening and a great holiday weekend. Bye, everybody.